Looking for brilliant CPD that is inspiring, illuminating and impactful? Well, Inner Drive's training is evidence-informed, engaging and makes a real difference. Whether it is in person at your training days or online through our Teachers CPD Academy, Inner Drive is transforming how schools and colleges do professional development. Email us at info@innerdrive.co.uk to take your staff training to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Inner Drive Science of Learning podcast with me, Bradley Bush. This is the pod where we'll discuss the latest and greatest cognitive science and educational studies. Because we believe there is gold in the research, and if we can make it accessible for the right people, i.e. you, our lovely brand new listeners, we think it can be transformational in the lives of students. In each episode, we're going to discuss 3 studies. Some are seminal, some are recent, all are illuminating. When we uncover a key cognitive science principle, you will hear the principle ping. And when we discuss the nuance of application, you will hear the nuance noise, which today sounds something like this. Today, I'm joined with our first ever guest, the one and only Amarbeer Singh, and we are talking all things cognitive science. Amarbeer, welcome to the pod.
Cheers, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Did you like my introduction?
It was very good. Yeah, it was very slick.
I was very, very proud.
It's very good. I'm very impressed.
Thanks.
I'm curious to hear what the nuance noise and the ping. What was the ping?
Cognitive science ping.
Cognitive science ping. Yeah, I'm curious to know what they are.
Well, we will see what happens in post-editing on that. So, yeah, first ever episode. So, first of all, a big thank you for being our first ever guest. I'm so happy that we've got you on. And we're doing a big topic. We're talking about cognitive science in general. And we've got 3 studies that we're going to talk through. So let's jump straight in with the first one.
Sure, sounds good.
So the first study is one that I know we've both written about previously in our work. It's the famous Dunlosky 2013 toolbox study. Before we get into the study, I just wanted to gauge your opinion. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, I think for me, this might be the most influential study of the last 10 or 15 years that I can think of. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely up there for sure. Just in terms of, so I think there's 2 things. Like, firstly, the paper that Professor Dunlosky wrote, the toolbox paper, is a sort of summary of this wider research paper that him and his colleagues did. Yeah. And the thing I like about the toolbox paper is that he's just written in such an accessible way. If you compare it to the wider research paper, they're completely different, sort of stylistically and linguistically. But he's written that toolbox paper in such a powerful, accessible way that you're right. I think in terms of, the average teacher picking this up, and even if they had no exposure to any of these sort of ideas before, they can start to grapple with some of these ideas. And let's be honest, that's how I came across it. So I came across it. It was one of the first papers that I was given when I was on my master's program. Yeah. I did my master's, when I was 7 years out of uni, and even my university background wasn't sort of literature based, it wasn't that sort of research based. So I wasn't really familiar with any of this, but this paper just resonated with me. It made me completely change how I thought about my teaching. And one of the famous things he says in it, one of the most quotable lines, is this idea of, we spend loads of time teaching our kids the content and what we want them to learn, but do we spend an equal amount of time, or even an appropriate amount of time, teaching them how to learn as well? And I just never thought about it like that. I'd never thought about learning in that sort of like independent sense. For me, I'd always thought of learning as like, well, I've taught it and it's been learned. And it's a simple sort of input-output equation. And this study for me this paper was for me the start of questioning some of my own beliefs and practices.
So it's interesting you say that. So I want to talk about the accessibility of it in a bit. In terms of like it being the starting point for you. So I guess just for context for me is, so I, at the time of this paper, so I was working in elite sport, so mainly in football and with Olympic and Paralympic athletes. Okay. My whole focus up until then had mainly been around helping people perform under pressure. So essentially, if we're talking about the equivalent, I guess, would be like self-regulation. So you have your ability, can you demonstrate it and execute it in one-off situations, be it in major competitions? I guess the equivalent in education would be in exams.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was like the key to being like a high performer, is like this ability to execute under pressure. And then I read this paper And it was a real fork in the road because this paper isn't about that stuff. It's actually about how do you get better? And it's about how do you learn? And I kind of felt it was like someone had shown me like the keys to the kingdom here. It's like it was really simply spelled out of like these things are just some things are better bets than others. And so I don't know if I'd be doing what I'm currently doing in education if I hadn't read that book. So it had this huge impact for me. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm guessing. See, I brought it with me. It had a huge impact for you because, like, you wrote a whole book on this study. Which makes you the perfect guest for this. But it must have had your life, I'm guessing now, would be different if this paper
didn't exist,
right?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, you said fork in the road. I completely agree. Like, and I think the thing with this paper is what it does really, really well is take some of the things that I think, at least speaking from my experience, but teachers take to be sort of intuitive and say like, is it really that straightforward? Like, you know, are these intuitive things that we think are things to do or things to not do, is that really the case when it comes to learning? And it does it in a way that's not, you know, critical. It's not trying to preach or anything. It just sort of asks the question and poses like, you know, if this is what we're trying to achieve, these are some of the things that we do, and this is the sort of ranking of them in terms of the outcomes that we're looking for. Yeah.
So let's talk about this ranking. So let's go. So one of the things I liked about the paper is it didn't really focus on effect sizes, which I kind of really like, because I think when you're trying to translate and explain research findings, saying someone, you know, effect size of 0.33, for most people, they don't actually know what does that practically mean. So this does something different. It looked at high, moderate and low utility.
Yes.
And I think the word utility is quite interesting there because it's not so much saying better, like good or bad. It's basically saying these strategies for a range of students in a range of subjects in a range of types of settings, are they likely or less likely to be effective? So I think putting in that sort of language is interesting.
100%.
And so basically they came up with this list of strategies and rate them on how high their utility was. So the top two being retrieval practice and spacing. Then you've got stuff like elaborative interrogation and interleaving in the middle. And then low down was things like rereading and underlining, essentially. And I guess the key thing that came out for me there was not all learning techniques are equal. Like, just like some of them, if you had to plant a flag in the ground and bet your mortgage on one or the other, you would go for, like, not all the time, but for most of the time, for most of the students, X is a better bet than Y. And things like retrieval practice and spacing. And so I think that's really powerful. And what you said about, you know, you read it and it kind of changed how you thought about it. I think, I often say to teachers, don't know what you think, if you could only read one study on cognitive science, it'd be this one. Because A, there's a good overview, and B, it's kind of like a gateway drug. Like, you can't just read it. Like, you read it and you're like, and then there's this list of other studies that they mentioned, because what they did is they went through like over 400 studies. So like the reference list alone is, if you don't know where to start with research, you start with this paper and it kind of gets the ball rolling. Has that been your experience when you've been talking to teachers about this study and your view of this paper?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you say, it is, I won't use the phrase gateway drug, but
I did wonder if I should use that as well. So that's good. We'll see if that makes the post-edit cut.
But I think, in terms of it being like that first window into this world.
That's a better way of describing it.
I don't think there's a better one, because I think what this paper does as well is it speaks to so many layers of like a teacher's experience or a school experience, because it's not just talking about, you know, what you do in the classroom. It's talking about what you do in the classroom, but also what pupils will do away from it. It's talking about everyday sort of pupil experiences, the sort of things that, you know, I as a teacher would recommend, and the sort of things that you probably as a student would have done. Like, you know, you've gone to university, you've gone through your schooling life yourself. You probably did do some underlining. You probably did do some highlighting. You might be reading some papers now in which you're doing those things, right? Like, and it gets to the heart of, well, you know, we are all doing most of these things all of the time. But I think, you said about the phrase utility. I think his title, that strengthening the student toolbox, I think that phrasing is quite intentional.
You're right.
Because the question I think he's asking is, well, are we using the right tool for the job? He doesn't use that phrase, like you said, like, this is not a good strategy or a bad strategy. It's, you know, this is what I want to achieve. So what's the best tool for that job?
Yeah.
Just like, a builder would do, or a carpenter.
Yeah.
They wouldn't use a generic tool for a generic job. There'd be specific things for specific purposes. I think that's what the question that the paper asks. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful.
So on that note then, so you have these things like retrieval and spacing that come across very favourably in the study. Things like rereading and highlighting, less so. If you were going to sum up your opinion on like why some strategies, like what do they have in common? The high utility strategies, what do they have in common? And what do the low utility strategies have in common? Like why essentially are some strategies more likely to lead to better learning than others?
Yeah.
I guess, how would you explain that to someone?
So I have a colleague, amazing colleague named Nick Rose, and he summed it up and he said, practice can make perfect, but not all practice is equivalent.
Right, okay.
And I think that gets to the heart of this. So things like space practice, retrieval practice, even what they rated as sort of moderate utility, so elaborative interrogation, interleaving, what they do is you can't engage in those processes passively.
Right.
They are inherently effortful processes. So if you are trying to engage on these things, if you're trying to retrieve something from memory, if you're doing it after a period of time, so it's spaced, if you're mixing things up and you're doing it sort of interleave problems, you'll feel those cogs turning. Like you can feel the sort of mental strain of it. Whereas I'm sure we've all had that experience of, you read a page, you get to the bottom and you're like, I actually can't remember what I've just read. You've just done it, right? Like you literally just done it because, you've been daydreaming, you've been looking out the window. Like all of these things can be fairly passive processes. You can highlight, you can underline, you can read stuff without really taking much of it in at all. And so I think that's sort of the key thing that separates out these sort of two ends of the spectrum. It's impossible to engage in sort of practice testing and just do it passively, have your attention somewhere else. Whereas it's very possible to read or highlight or underline something and actually be paying very little attention to what it is that you're reading because your mind is just elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's quite an eye-opening study, because if you kind of take that philosophy of like, right, you have to think hard to do retrieval and spacing. I don't have to think hard when I reread because I can skim read.
Exactly.
I don't have to think hard when I underline because I can just kind of brainlessly and aimlessly underline. And then it just begs the question then, so what's the activities in schools and colleges that we're asking people to do for students? Are they helping students think hard, or can those activities be done on autopilot? And then once you start seeing it in that kind of paradigm, it actually becomes really obvious kind of what activities are likely to lead to learning and what aren't. So I think it becomes a bit of a penny drop moment.
Yeah, for sure.
For some people when they think about it in those terms.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even something like rereading.
Yeah.
So like the caveat will be, I said earlier, the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
There's no point trying to do retrieval practice if you've got nothing to retrieve.
Perfect, right?
So you, at that point, absolutely, go back and reread your notes or your textbook, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But what you will find is diminishing returns, because the more you reread, the more familiar it becomes. And so you'll find yourself scanning the reading rather than doing it properly, because you sort of can anticipate what's coming next because you've got a level of familiarity with it. And so actually, even though you might be rereading, you might do it and it might be, it'll feel easy and all those sorts of things, you're actually getting fewer returns from it.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you should absolutely stop and do something that's more effortful. Like you say, what are the thought process that we're asking our pupils, our students to engage with? Is it making them think really, really hard about the content? That's the question we need to be asking like all the time.
Yeah. And I guess if that's your North Star, like you're not going to go far wrong.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So if that's the study that really sheds light on like how not all learning strategies are equal, let's go on to the next study, which is, I know, one you've chosen.
Yes.
That looks at teachers' beliefs.
Yes.
About this sort of stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Go on, over to you.
So this is from Professor Jonathan Firth, who is a professor up in Scotland.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing research he's done. But this particular study focused on, teachers' thoughts and understanding about memory and what the implications might be for professional development, essentially. So what Professor Firth did was to send out a survey, basically, to a number of, or one school in Scotland, and then a number of users who engage with educational research on Twitter.
Right.
So the numbers we're talking are fairly small, around 80, 90 respondents. But there was a good range of sort of primary, secondary, and some HE and FE in there as well. And there were a few really interesting things that he found. So firstly, he found that teachers in general are less likely to be susceptible to common misconceptions about memory than the general public.
That's good.
Which is really good.
Yeah.
Which is really good. And psychology teachers in particular were even less likely to be susceptible than sort of general teachers and therefore the general public as well.
Big up the psychology teachers.
Exactly.
Love that.
Which is very reassuring
Yeah.
as well. But what the study did highlight, well, there were actually a really few number of interesting things where, teachers, and I've definitely been guilty of these myself,
Yeah.
think about memory in a way that actually doesn't chime with, what we find from the research.
Right.
And I think there are a number of reasons for this. So, for example, one of the things that the survey asked was, essentially, can we treat our memories as a video recorder that just records stuff pretty accurately as we go through life?
Yeah.
Now, memory researchers were given basically this question, and all of them disagreed. Like, it was unanimous. All of them disagreed. But it's quite a high proportion of teachers actually said, yes, this is how memory works. And if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I probably would have said yes as well. That's how I understand memory. And I think, obviously based on the research, what we're going to discuss, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Like, we know memory is not like an accurate recollection of exactly what happened and how it happened. It's susceptible to decay, to interference, all those sorts of things. But like I said, if you asked me 10 years ago, I probably would have said that it's pretty accurate.
Which is interesting, right? Because teaching, you're in the kind of the memory and the knowledge business, essentially. The way I like to describe memory is, when you watch on Netflix or in the cinema where it says based on a true story.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, right, based on a true story. We all know what that means. It means parts of it kind of happened, but the actual details and the exact words, there's a bit of artistic license.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I now think about memory.
Yeah, I really like that analogy.
Memory's based on a true story.
Yeah.
It kind of happened. The gist definitely happened.
Yeah.
But as you say, that decay or that misremembering, that is partly built into us now as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two things there. It's firstly, I think in general, memory gets sort of bad reputation within education.
Yeah.
And like I say, this is something I was guilty of because, I would say, I don't want my pupils just to be able to remember stuff. I don't want them to be able to regurgitate stuff. I want them to, be able to problem solve and think critically and those sorts of things. But I didn't really understand what I meant when I was saying these sorts of things. It's only after sort of delving into the research and coming into sort of the world I am now, realizing, all of these bigger skills that we might think of are built on a foundation of knowledge, of memory, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so I think actually the memory has a bad reputation, but unjustly so.
Which is interesting because Professor Firth, who did this study, so he co-wrote a book with my colleague Claire Badger on creativity. It's called Creativity for Teachers, and they put knowledge at the heart of that, which is kind of what you're saying. It's very hard to be creative if you don't know anything to be creative about or with. So I think he would definitely be in agreement with your views on that.
I mean, I've had conversations with colleagues, with friends before, and talk about how when kids are young and they play with Legos, they'll build amazing things. And the conversation I have is that they will build that, and they are creativity. And school doesn't suck the creativity out of kids. But if you wanted someone to build a house or a bridge, you wouldn't want them to sort of randomly be putting bits and pieces together. You'd want them to base it on some knowledge and then be creative within that, right?
100%. So on his study, the result that stood out for me. So you mentioned about kind of psychology teachers and that school teachers are better than general population. I thought it was interesting when they looked at teacher experience. So my reading of that was teacher experience made no difference in terms of how well you can spot those myths and misconceptions. Which is interesting because it means you can't just learn this stuff by osmosis. It's not just if you stick around long enough, trial and error, you'll get there. Which to me, and obviously I'm biased given what we do at Inner Drive, but for me that leads the charge for talking about CPD and training becomes really, really important because it's only obvious once you know it. And then it's common sense. But you have to have that initial input from somewhere, be it a study, be it on a training day, be it a book, because it's not enough to hope that people will just figure it out
100%
by themselves as they go along.
100%. And I think I think the thing with memory, and I'll be transparent here, like I'm not a memory researcher, I'm not a memory expert, but for me it was that sort of Pandora's box, right? Like I had that one insight, which was the sort of Dunlosky paper, and then I was like, oh my God, like, you know, I need to completely rethink my teaching, and it completely changed how I did it, how I viewed my classroom, how I went about my teaching practice. And it only happened because I had some professional development. Like that was the thing that unlocked it for me and allowed me to be a better teacher for my pupils.
And so with that paper, so you said that the teachers did better than general population. There were some stuff that still like makes you raise an eyebrow.
Yeah, for sure.
So like they're finding on, it seemed pretty split on retrieval versus rereading. A really low percentage kind of endorse spacing. Why do you think that is?
I think so. Again, like I think some of these things sort of feel intuitive, right? So I think the question they asked was, is it wise to wait until learners have almost forgotten things before you can go over them again? Right. And sort of 12% of teachers agreed.
12%?
12%, right. Which, you know, as someone who, like I said, is not an expert, but has an understanding of memory, now I can be like, yeah, that's probably the best time to wait. But as someone who probably doesn't have that understanding, you think, well, why would I want them to get to the point where they're about to forget and then go back to them? Like, it doesn't seem intuitive, right?
Forgetting sounds like the enemy.
Exactly.
Like, I want to avoid that at all costs.
Exactly.
And I don't want these things to get fragile.
Yes.
Would be the thought process, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly that. And so you've got the sort of the intuitive nature, but then also the sort of classroom realities of, well, you know, even if we take that as being true, how on earth as a teacher am I supposed to figure that out for one kid, let alone, you know, the 30 plus that I'm working with? Yeah. And then what happens if I misjudge it? What happens if they have just forgotten it? Yeah. And then, you know, I'm having to, you know, support a pupil who's questioning their self-confidence, who's getting things wrong. And I'm doing that again en masse, right?
It's kind of like, I guess, like the fear is like, do no harm. Like exactly. The last thing I want to do is hinder your learning and get it wrong so you do completely forget it. So, yeah, I guess really like, it's to be expected.
Yes. Yeah. So I think there's sort of two layers. There's an intuitive of like, well, you know, why would I want them to forget? That doesn't really make sense. But also then the sort of practical perspective of, even if we take it as true, you know, how am I supposed to manage that in my classroom? What would that possibly look like?
Yeah. Okay. So if that's teachers' perceptions, by our good friend Dr. Jonathan Firth, let's go on to the third and final study of the day. So this is a really recent study, actually. So this was done by Sultana and colleagues in 2025, looked at hundreds and hundreds of teenagers from a large range of schools, and they got them to basically assess and review how they do their studying, how they do their learning and revision, and what their perceptions are of essentially a lot of Dunlosky's strategies that they talk about. Before I go into the study, I'm curious to say, I'm going to do a quiz with you now. If you had to predict what the top 3 most common study strategies that students did in this study, what do you think the top 3 would be? Not what you want them to be.
Yeah.
What you think they actually were.
I imagine that it wouldn't be too dissimilar to my own experience or my students. I imagine highlighting's probably up there.
Correct.
I imagine some sort of summarization or note-taking maybe is probably
making
up
notes,
there.
Yeah, good. One more.
And then I reckon rereading of some sort is probably up there.
3 out of 3.
There you go. Yeah.
So making notes, rereading and highlighting by some way as well. And when I read that, it kind of spoke to what you said earlier. All 3 for me just give this illusion of learning. It's like, look how many pages I've read. Look how many notes I've taken. I could evidence that if someone came in. So it gives us like kind of this false confidence. I always think with highlighting, I always think there's a really weird quirk of the teenage brain. And we don't know why this is the case. But when you say the word highlighting, what the teenage brain hears, I think, is colouring in. And it's like, look how many colours, look how many subsections, often from quite conscientious students as well, with good intentions. And it kind of never forces you to confront what you do or don't know. So like you get to end that learning period, that's study session, feeling good in the short term. So let me hit you with some stats about the cognitive science strategies. So when they surveyed the students, and it was this classic sort of survey of like, do you do this never, sometimes,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
often or always, those sort of questions, right? In terms of the always,
Okay.
so retrieval practice, 1 in 5 students said always. In terms of spacing,
Yep.
1 in 6.
Okay.
And in terms of interleaving, 1 in 20.
Okay.
Right.
Fine.
So huge difference there.
Yeah, massive.
Interesting, interleaving was seen as the least used strategy of the whole range of all the different options.
Fine.
And I know we've got another pod episode coming out where we're going to deep dive into interleaving. If we talk about retrieval, I guess, for a second, one of the things that came out in the paper was a lot of students felt retrieval practice is really good at assessing learning. And they didn't realise that it could be a method to accelerate the learning.
Yeah.
So you do a whole bunch of learning and then you do a quiz at the end of your like studying to see what you learn, as opposed to that being actually a key part of the learning. And so I guess my main question that I wanted to ask you about this study is, bear in mind, it's a recent study.
Yeah. Last year.
I have the luxury of seeing, I go all over talking to schools about cognitive science.
Okay.
So we do a lot in England, a lot in Northern Ireland, but we got work with schools in America and Dubai, and you get to go all over. I think, and there are obviously some big challenges in England with education at the moment. One of the things that we are absolutely leading the charge on is cognitive science.
Okay.
So I think you can go into a school in England and say, have you heard of retrieval practice? Either for staff or students, you're getting a large percentage putting that hand up.
Sure.
I think you go into schools in, say, America, you're getting less than 1%.
Okay.
I think we are absolutely at the forefront of cognitive science.
That's really interesting.
In terms of like people's understanding and being a part of the like day-to-day vocabulary. And yet, that's been the case for the last 10 years we've been on this like journey. And yet you see studies like this and you kind of go, well, there's still a long way to go.
Yes.
1 in 5 doing retrieval always, 1 in 6 doing spacing, 1 in 20 doing interleaving always. I guess that begs the question, how do we get more students using better strategies? Because like the research now is pretty overwhelming. Like it would take a lot for me to now go, or maybe spacing and retrieval aren't very good strategies because there's just such an abundance of research. How do you think we can like crack that nut and actually get more students doing it? Because it's one thing to do it in your classroom when your teachers can do it, but it's the independent work that I'm now quite into. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a great question. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where that we've solved this problem. And I say that because, not to be sort of pessimistic about it, but because let's put this into context. So like, you spoke about that kid earlier who spends hours highlighting, making the notes, their mind maps, bubble diagram, whatever it might be. They have loads of physical stuff to show for their efforts. And B, because of that, they feel like you said, well, I've done something productive and it looks nice, so I feel good about myself. Whereas if they just sat and spent an hour, using some flashcards, say, and all they did was look at the flashcard and try to retrieve that stuff, at the end of the hour, they've got nothing physical to show for it, right? Like all they've done is sort of some mental processes, they've got some flashcards, and they probably would have got stuff wrong. They would have found it really difficult, definitely found it much more difficult than sort of highlighting a textbook or highlighting their notes, right? And so you've got these sort of two almost cycles going on. You've got this vicious cycle that pulls kids towards some of these less effective strategies because it's easy to do, it makes them feel really good about themselves, and there's a product at the end of it. And so, why would you, ultimately, what human wouldn't sit there and say, I'm getting loads of stuff right, and it's easy.
I feel good about that.
And I'm going to stop doing it. Like, it doesn't feel intuitive. On the other side, you've got these strategies that, you can feel the cogs turning, you can feel the mental exertion, you're getting things wrong. Again, what human's going to sit there and say, you know what, I'm trying really hard, I'm literally sweating, I'm getting it wrong, but I'm having a great time doing it, right? Like it doesn't, on that intuitive level, it just doesn't sort of appeal. And I don't think so. That's why I say, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we can solve that for 100% of students. I think there are definitely some things that we can do to support students taking ownership of some of that learning and supporting them. And the first thing is like, how do we speak about retrieval practice and practice testing in schools? The question I often ask when I work with schools and teachers is, let's say you give your kid a test, you mark it, you give it back to them. What's the first thing that they do? And unanimously, they'll look at the score.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, what's the second thing they do? And unanimously, they'll say, compare it to their mate. Right? Like, what'd you get? And so I'm saying, well, what's happened in that time then? Like, has the kid paid any attention to what they've got right or wrong? Obviously, the answer is no. What they've done is pay attention to the end of the product that they've got, rather than the process. So as a school, what culture are you setting around testing? Yeah. Like you said, are you seeing testing as a facilitator of learning or as a product of it, a way to measure learning? And I think Carl Hendrick and Paul Kirshner, they wrote a book a few years ago, How Learning Happens. I've got a quote from them. So they say, retrieval practice is possibly the most effective way of retaining knowledge, and yet this discovery is often used poorly in and by schools, with testing being used as the final endpoint in a process of learning, as opposed to a means of facilitating learning along the journey.
Right.
I think that quite sums it up perfectly.
Brilliant. Yeah. And that is the big challenge. And I guess that challenge, what they're describing there as well, it's not going to change overnight. Like 100%. You're trying to unpick habits and basically get people to unlearn previous thought processes and learn new ones. So I'm just wondering, let's say we come back in a year's time or 2 years' time, we do another podcast and other studies come out on this. I'm wondering if the big next step in cognitive science is combining it with some of the social psychology stuff around behavior norms and habit formation, because I would love nothing more than it just being about logically, once you know about stuff, you're then going to do that, stuff. But that clearly, I think that's a key starting point. But it clearly isn't enough. Clearly, we have to get students to experience it, to make it in a way that they want to do it, and they're not distracted by almost the seductive alternatives that are easier. And maybe that's where cognitive science needs to go, is looking more about that sort of social psychology element around motivation and habit formation. Maybe, who knows, but maybe that's the next step. Yeah,
no, I'd agree. Like, if I reflect on my own process, I was very lucky, to be honest, with my own schooling. I had a teacher who, we were revising for an RE exam, and they suggested to use flashcards. Now, I'm not sure he knew why he suggested it. I definitely didn't know, anything about memory at the time. But I sort of intuitively felt, well, if I'm going to have to rely on my memory in the exam, surely I should probably be able to do that before I go into the exam. And so I've been using flashcards, when I got to uni and afterwards as well. It's not to say I didn't do any highlighting or underlining. I definitely did those things as well. But I used sort of retrieval practice inherently because I sort of had that inherent idea. But I only had it because there was that sort of, like you say, that sort of reflective process that I had a teacher who supported me through. And so I think the next step, you're right, is, how do we support kids to understand, yes, this is going to be difficult. Yes, it won't feel like it's working, but, bear with it. You'll see the results at the end of it. This is why it makes sense. And all those sort of motivational aspects that we need to bring into it as well.
So on that note, and maybe it's a good way to kind of finish on this study, is Blake Harvard, who I think is one of the most phenomenal educators that I've come across. And his knowledge of retrieval practice is just superb. His book, Do I Have Your Attention, where he talks about this stuff, I think is fantastic. One of the phrases he said to me once was, the line he uses with his students is you basically get to choose when you get it wrong, because you're going to get it wrong at some stage. Do you want to get it wrong in the study session, during the retrieval, or do you want to get it wrong in the final exam? And I love that. You get to make your choice. And that is a bit like what you were describing, pretty much the exact same. I'm going to need my memory, so I should probably start doing this stuff in the study phase as well. Yeah, exactly.
I love that line.
Amazing. Amarbeer, thank you so much. I honestly could talk to you all day, every day about this stuff. I honestly couldn't think of anyone better who I'd rather have for our first episode of the Science of Learning podcast. If anyone wants to get in touch with you or read some of your work, how could they do that?
Yeah, my best bet is probably LinkedIn, to be honest. It's where I'm most active. Just type my name in on LinkedIn. Or if you Google Unpacking Education, I've got a blog that I write from. Probably not as much as regular as I should, but I'm trying to get back on track. But yeah, either of those, either my blog or my LinkedIn is probably the best way to get in touch.
Thank you so much. For everyone listening, thank you so much for giving us your time and lending us your ears for the first podcast. We really hope you enjoy it. We've got some amazing guests and future topics coming up. Please do let us know what you think. Like, retweet, and especially subscribe. It makes all the difference. If you're extra kind, you'll leave us a 5-star review. Thank you everyone for listening, and Amarbeer, thank you again.
Cheers. Thanks for having me on, Brad.
If you've enjoyed this episode and want to improve your staff's understanding of the science of learning, you'd simply love Inner Drive's training. We offer brilliant in-person workshops plus online support through the Teachers CPD Academy, trusted by thousands of teachers worldwide. Simply email us now at info@innerdrive.co.uk to take your staff's professional development to the next level.